Thank you, Maria, and good afternoon, colleagues, faculty, and staff. Thank you for joining us today. As I mentioned, we had a new added feature. It was suggested we play some music before we start the webinar, so we did that, so hopefully you enjoyed it. My name is Ken Kettenbiel. I'm the Vice Chancellor for External Relations, for those of you who don't know me. Today we're joined by, of course, Chancellor Grasso, Provost Sue Alcock, our new Vice Chancellor for Business Affairs, Bryan Dadey, and our Vice Provost for Enrollment Management, Melissa Stone. So if the four of you can turn on your cameras as we get ready to start. We also have Noel Hornbacher and Lee McGrath that are on this portion of the webinar. So if there's any questions that our panelists can't answer, we may defer to them for some data or for some assistance on answering the questions. As with the previous town hall that we did last week or about a week and a half ago, we do have the chat feature on, and that is intended for the people on the webinar to converse with each other. If you do have a question, please use the Q&A tab that is at the lower part of your screen. That is where we will address questions. And for those of you that submitted questions in advance, we have those and we're prepared to either address them in the PowerPoint presentation that you will see shortly, or we will ask the questions for the greater campus community. And in some cases, some of the panelists may reach out directly to you because some of them were specific in nature. And I do want to add, if there's any question we don't get to, please feel free to email anyone on this webinar for an answer to your question if you don't feel it was covered appropriately there. So with that, again, thank you for joining us. And I'm going to throw it over to our Chancellor to kick things off. And we'll follow the same format. We'll have a series of presentations and comments, and then we'll do Q&A at the end. So with that, Chancellor Grasso.
Thanks very much, Ken. And I want to thank everyone for joining us in our second town hall of the semester. And it's hard to believe that we're almost to the halfway point of the semester. And things are going very, very well for us. And you know that we started our face-to-face activities yesterday, and it also marked yesterday marked the one month point in our new Vice Chancellor for Business Affairs time on campus, or so to speak, on campus. And I'd like to introduce to all of you Bryan Dadey. Bryan has over 16 years of experience in public urban research universities. He was AVP, Associate Vice President at the University of Toledo, Vice President of the University of Toledo Foundation, and Senior Vice President at Senior Associate Vice President at Wayne State University. He's a certified public accountant. He's worked with Ernst & Young in auditing, especially nonprofits, universities being among them. He has a bachelor's degree from Ohio State, and he's a very proud Buckeye. And if anybody's seen pictures of him with his wall, you'll know he displays that very proudly. He also has an undergraduate, a master's in business administration and finance from the University of Toledo. He serves as our chief finance officer and our vice chancellor for business affairs. Now, the Vice Chancellor for Business Affairs incorporates a lot of other functions. At a lot of universities, this title is often Vice President for Finance and Administration. But here we call it Business Affairs, and it includes police, facilities, HR, of course, and and of course finance and business, which is very important. And we are in the process of re-looking at a lot of aspects of our budgets and our finance systems on campus. And Bryan is bringing a lot of experience to bear on this. And one of the things that we are committed to is that our budget is driven by our priorities, not the other way around. But at the same time, we are very limited in where our revenue streams come from and the size of our revenue streams. So that means we have to be very strategic in how we deploy our revenue streams and our revenue and resources. And this is why we undertook a zero-based budgeting exercise, and Bryan will talk a little bit about that later on. And it's also why we're looking at an RCM model, a responsibly centered management model, because this helps diversify where the decisions are made down to the lowest possible level, closest to where the action is, and it encourages the development of new revenue streams. So these are two activities that hopefully will help build our budget in a way that is going to support our activities and is going to be sustainable into the future. In Ann Arbor, the chief budget officer is the provost. At UM-Dearborn and at UM-Flint, the chief budget officer is the chancellor. So although the chief budget officer is at that level, a lot of the recommendations and the thinking and all of the analysis happens at this other level that's being led by Bryan, along with the provost. And there will be a university budget committee that will be involved in recommending input to the process as well. So with that said, I want to again thank everyone for being here. I want to turn it over to Bryan. He's going to be the star of the show, and then we can answer any of your questions at the end. So Bryan, it's all yours.
All right. Thank you, Domenico, and good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate having the opportunity to speak with you today at this Budget and Finance Town Hall. I'm going to share a short presentation. Hopefully everybody sees it. Okay. All right. So get to the navigation part. Okay, so these are the topics that I'd like to cover. Just briefly go over what I see as my priorities, talk a bit about fiscal year 2021, which is the fiscal year that we are in right now. Talk about the budget transition that we're undertaking with the ZBB initiative, as well as the new budget model under RCM. Discuss the fiscal 22 budget development process and calendar, and then finally touch on the federal aid programs that the university has received under the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund. Some of you may know that as the CARES Act. So very quickly, my priorities. First, any CFO is going to want to come in and understand the financial condition of an institution. And really what that involved was ratio analysis, financial trend analysis, and other metrics that I reviewed over the last couple weeks. Then more urgently, that second bullet point, really focusing on fiscal 22's budget development process, and also the new RCM model, the policies, the procedures that go along with that model. And then I'll spend a lot of my time on the strategic plan initiatives, mostly focusing on the economic sustainability section, because that's where a lot of those initiatives that I'll be co-leading or heavily involved in. On the HR side, I'm focused on what does work look like after the pandemic, embracing remote working, flexible work arrangements, and also our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. On the facility side, my attention is looking long-term. Eventually, we'll look to put together a new campus master plan that involves then long-term capital planning and also the complementary long-term debt plan that goes to support those initiatives. And then a focus of mine is how we manage deferred maintenance, and more importantly, how are we funding deferred maintenance? And then for the public safety team, my priority is to make sure that this team has updated technology and equipment so that they can be successful in their job and meet the expectations of our community. So now we'll move to fiscal 2021. Like I said, this is our current current fiscal year. This is the revenue forecast, and we really anticipate revenue to come in just slightly under budget, about $400,000 under budget. And considering all of the unpredictability of the pandemic, I think this is a really positive thing, and something that's really encouraging. Our peers are not doing as well. And if we look at what else has happened, . the ability to use the CARES Act money to offset the COVID-related expenses. You know, the fact that going on campus has allowed us
I think we're having some technical difficulties.
I think we have to buy Bryan one of those booster things. Oh,
Yes.
make
think
him a
We've lost
personal
him.
So now,
spot. Oh dear, okay.
He'll be right back. Just a pause in the action. We need some commercial breaks in here. Oh, here he is. Oh, there he was.
I was afraid this was going to happen, and I mentioned it earlier that my internet is not the most reliable. All right, is the screen shared?
Yep.
yes.
All right. I apologize. Hopefully that will not happen again. 3 kids on the network. My network is stressed. So as we talked about what's happened in fiscal 2021, mentioned a lot of the expense management and really leading us into a much stronger financial position than we were at the end of last year, and also compared to our peers. So overall, I would frame us in a good financial position, but fragile. And why are we fragile? Because there's so many future challenges and pressure points, and we'll get into that a little bit later into the presentation. Also, that happened in 2021, the state reduced its state appropriations, but it replaced that with federal aid dollars from the coronavirus relief fund. So holding higher education harmless, which we were happy to see. And then as far as enrollment, really coming in a little bit under last year, but right in line to what we expected as we put the budget together. So where does that leave us for 2021? We're in good shape, so we should continue looking at strategic hiring. That should be approved by the applicable senior leader, the provost, or the vice chancellor. Except for critical things, critical needs, there's still a ban relating to travel, hosting, in-person conferences, and consultants, and that's all for safety considerations. All non-compensation should continue to support relevant operating needs. As far as research just needs to follow our in-person protocols. And as far as individually controlled funds, such as faculty startup, indirect cost recovery, research grants, professional development, faculty discretionary, that should continue to support activities as appropriate. So as I mentioned before, our financial condition is good, but challenged. And really these are the challenges. We have pressure on our revenue sources and pressure on our expenses. Net tuition revenue, we know about the declining numbers in high school graduates in the state of Michigan. It makes Michigan a highly competitive environment, given the number of institutions that we have across the state. We're seeing more and more institutions announcing new financial aid programs that we need to compete with. And of course, for this fall, the pandemic's always going to present some uncertainties. As far as state appropriations, the governor came out with the recommendation that would increase funding to the states, but on a one-time basis. Presented a 2% increase on a one-time basis through the House, the Senate, and Conference Committee. Higher education funding continues to decline. My expectation is it'll be flat for fiscal year 2022. The real concern is 2023, where the states kind of indicated a potential significant shortfall. So that is obviously a concern heading into the future. And again, on the expense side, it's not that expenses are growing that much, but the fact that revenue isn't and expenses naturally, that becomes an operating situation and challenge. Obviously, we need to remain competitive in our salaries for both faculty and staff, for retention and recruiting. Health insurance continues to rise. For this cycle, property insurance and other insurances increase significantly. And then always having to keep up with deferred maintenance. And if you don't, you end up costing more in replacement costs as well as potential failure costs. So a lot of challenges lay ahead, not unlike most higher education institutions. So let's talk a little bit about the budget transition. Two main initiatives. One, the zero-based budgeting initiative. That was really to focus on critical needs, reallocate resources, and look for efficiencies. The move towards RCM, that budget model, is a more transparent model. It empowers more decentralized decision-making, incentivizes more entrepreneurial thought, with the hope that that'll grow and diversify our revenue. And always important to make sure that we are balancing between centralized resources and decentralized resources in any budget model that we have. This slide really just illustrates that revenue diversification and the fact that Dearborn is so reliant on two sources of revenue, and that's the state or the state appropriations and the net tuition and fees. It's almost 99% of our revenue, and not having a lot of diversification and other sources of revenue, that is considered a financial risk. And it's important to focus on growing that very small portion of the pie.
Bryan, you're frozen and that slide didn't show up here. Oop.
I think we lost Bryan again.
Yep,
We'll be back.
he will be back. Hopefully he can show that slide when he comes back.
All right, am I back?
You are, Bryan, if you could show the slide that had the pie chart on the revenue diversification
Okay.
or lack thereof.
So again, just illustrate this illustrates, and again, sorry for the interruption. Hopefully this is the last one, but I can't guarantee that.
Maybe, maybe you can shut off your camera, increase your bandwidth that way in terms of your stability.
Okay, let's hope that works.
There you go.
Okay. So again, just an illustration of how reliant we are on two sources of revenue: student tuition and fees and state appropriations, and the need to diversify and increase our other revenue sources. So where are we at with ZBB and RCM? So at this point right now, ZBB, we're finalizing the recalibration of the base budget. Data that we received through the ZBB process and are putting forth a revised base budget. And the next step is to meet with the deans and the vice chancellors to go through those results. And at the end of the day, we want to have a revised for RCM. We have a model developed and it's been shared through many the next step there is for me to review the model and work through the related policies. And
We lost Bryan again. We will make these slides available. That was one of the questions I've seen come in on the Q&A. So we will share those, definitely the slides with the campus. Bryan is almost all the way through the slides, so that's good news. Looks like he's coming back in.
All right, I apologize once again. I'm going to try to get through these quickly since I'm having network issues. Not sure what people last heard. But you know, as far as ZBB, we're going to be meeting with the deans and division leaders to go over the results. With RCM, the model has been developed, it's been shared. The next steps are my detailed review of the model and the related policies and procedures. And the plan for RCM is to run it in parallel with the FY22 budget development and officially launch it in fiscal year 23. So for fiscal year 22 budget development, this is a general process and calendar. So looking at March, we want to have a preliminary budget based on early projections for enrollment and revenue estimates. We'll distribute budget materials out to the colleges and divisions and have those meetings with the deans and division leaders. And then looking either end of March, beginning of April to have the University Budget Committee's first meeting. That group has been formed, but it does not appear that it has been communicated to the campus, and we will go ahead and do that shortly. During April, a lot of budget discussion and prioritization with the senior leadership team, a refinement of our budget assumptions, updated enrollment, and any other information needs updated. And we want by April to have a real solid budget plan going forward. In May, again, having probably the second meeting with the University Budget Committee. And then June is when the Board of Regents will approve the budget. All right, my last slide is about the federal aid programs that we have received, called the Higher Education Emergency Relief Funds. HERF 1 came out of the CARES Act legislation. HERF 2 came out of a different legislation, and we're still waiting to see if HERF 3 has been made official yet. So for HERF 1, you know, again, very specific. The numbers or the funds had to be used for things that related to moving our education from in-person to online. And we use those funds to purchase hardware, software, training, curriculum development, and for administrative support. For HERF 2, really limited guidance so far. And so really all of it said is you can use it to defray expenses associated with the coronavirus. And I provided some of the language that they used in the legislation, but we're waiting to see some additional guidance and details coming out of the Department of Education so that we can make better decisions. So with that, I think I'll conclude the presentation and give it back to Ken. Again, apologize for the technical issues that I was having.
Thank you, Bryan. And again, we will make these slides available to the community when we send an update on today's town hall. So you will have those. And with that, Melissa, if you could talk just briefly about enrollment trends and other pieces that relate to the overall budget from an enrollment management standpoint.
Sure, thanks, Ken. Yeah, it's amazing to think, I was just looking at the calendar, that it's been almost a year that we've all been in this mode, but we're still all dealing, right, with the technology and what it means. I am going to just run through very briefly a couple slides. I want to leave a lot of time for questions that I know people may have. So I'm going to share a couple things. Obviously, I know that, as was mentioned in Bryan's presentation, everyone's interested in understanding where enrollment is because it is such a big driver, obviously, of the revenue. I'm not going to go through this slide necessarily every number. This is really just to kind of highlight what this past year, how we fell. And what I will say is that, you know, obviously coming in, I've been here about a year and a half now. My first full year being on campus was not intended to be focused, obviously, on a pandemic, but I am really proud of the work that we did as a campus to really navigate this year. And so yes, while obviously each of the pipelines is showing the fact that we were down really in overall enrollment, I think that we planned so well as a campus, and as sort of was indicated, I think in comparison to what we've obviously read in the news this year with our competitors. So really proud to work at this university and feel that it was really as unique as this year was. I think we managed well. But what I wanted to really highlight with this is the fact that yes, when we talk about enrollment, it's both the new students coming in and the fact that we did have impacts, obviously, while FIDIACs, or our new freshmen, was relatively flat. It was not a significant shift. Obviously, transfers were significantly down compared to prior years, and that was a pattern we saw across the state and also with our community college partners. And then with graduate, as everyone knows, the international pipeline and the volatility with the pandemic contributed to the decline there. So, most of this was related to the pandemic, but we did plan for that. But I also wanted to remind people that enrollment is not just new students, it's about recruitment. And so as we look forward and we talk about what we're going to be doing around enrollment and recruitment, so much of it is also about the efforts we do to help with retention. So I just wanted to share to remind for those who don't look at the numbers maybe as much as I do. And again, I think as Ken said, we can share out slides, but this is just giving out at a high level when we do talk about enrollment and the big picture of things that we're looking at. As far as fall 21, because I know everyone's always anxious to see where we are, I will give you context that obviously where we are point in time depends on the pipeline. Our freshman pipeline starts a little bit earlier than our transfer and graduate. So I did want to remind everybody that some of the data I'm sharing, that our FIDIACs are significantly about 88% of our apps are typically in at this point. Transfer is generally only about 36%, and graduate on a general average 55%. So when you're looking at these numbers, this is point in time. I did want to just give everyone a picture of the landscape that at this point, as far as apps and admits, or what we can really speak to at this point, there is some strong on our freshman side with the new FIDIACs, where we are strong in our apps and our admits. This is second year of the Common App, and so we did see a growth in our apps this year. But I also think it's a positive number that our focus really is that about yielding our students. We've had a strong kind of app pipeline growing as we've looked at different initiatives, but really our focus is on how do we yield them? How do we tell them what we can offer as an institution? And really enhancing and working with Ken's area in collaboration on really marketing and yield messaging and leveraging things like Marketing Cloud and Salesforce. But that being said, there's obviously a lot of uncertainty still on what the pandemic impact will be. And we have made some positive changes, I will say, in our aid strategy to be really need focused with our freshman students this year. But at the same time, anytime you're making changes significantly in a strategy like that, of course, there is also a level of risk and uncertainty with that. So that's kind of the freshman landscape. We'll continue to monitor and obviously have more detailed updates as we move forward. Transfer, again, we are down in comparison to prior years, and so we are seeing that same pattern. But we do have the team working on some very targeted outreach and tactical plans to try to mitigate that this year. And I hope everyone saw the announcement we put out this week, where we have some new initiatives to help leverage sort of the initiatives coming out of the state to support some of our adult workers we're excited about. Again, that's an example of something that's more of a longer term strategy, not necessarily short term, as they'll start with our community college partners. But we are definitely looking at strategies for the pipeline of transfers. And graduate, again, very strong this year as far as apps. So much will be contingent on what the international landscape is going to look like with the pandemic. So again, we still sort of have to really be having our crystal balls out and monitoring that. So this is just before we close and go to questions. I think that it's important for everyone to understand, as much as we've been focusing on the actual pandemic and this year and focusing, there is a lot of activity and really trying to enhance the campus, which is going to help overall with recruitment and retention. So I'm not going to go through each of these. If you look at our strategic planning websites that have been developed, a lot of these are highlighted there. But I just wanted to remind everybody that the initiatives that came out of the strategic planning and are continuing to be discussed as part of that are all about focusing on recruitment and retention. And at the same time this year, we will continue to be planning out our longer term 3 to 5 year SEM planning as we continue to work on essentially implementing a lot of exciting things to help with the student experience this year. So this is, there's a lot of good work going on. At the same time, while we're not fully out of the pandemic, I am excited about a lot of the strategic initiatives that are being in the works that are going to help us long term. So with that, I'm sorry, I can usually talk fast, but I wanted to make sure that we had a lot of questions answered or had time for questions. I'm going to turn it back to you, Ken.
Cool. Thank you, Melissa. Okay, so just a reminder, if you do have a question, please use the Q&A tab at the webinar screen here. That's where we will be addressing questions. Quite a few of them are coming in. And then, of course, we have questions that were submitted in advance. So, Bryan, quite a few questions coming in. Can you just walk through, explain ZZB, explain RCM, what does RCM stand for, just in very high-level terms, and then how is this different from what we've been doing on campus from a budgeting standpoint for the last 5, 6, 7, 10 years?
Well, since I've only been here for 5 weeks, I can't really speak to what's happened, over.
Bryan, we lost your voice.
We should have Bryan call in on a phone line, Ken, and that way we'll have a stable connection.
I think he's coming in right now.
I know, but I think that we should ask him to just disconnect and maybe call in on the phone line so we have a stable connection.
Okay,
All right.
you want me to call in?
Bryan.
Yeah, Bryan, why don't you, if you could maybe call in on your phone, we'll have your voice. Maria, if you can maybe help him out with that too, if he needs some assistance. While Bryan's doing that, Melissa, here's a question for you regarding apps. And so it said, I missed the 83% of apps and 36% of apps means. Can that be explained?
Yeah, so it was funny, I was responding to her directly, but maybe others on it had the question. I was trying to give a context to where we are in the cycle because each of the populations are so different. So what I meant by is on average at this point in the cycle, we would have received 88% of our apps from the freshman class, just to give a sense of when I'm giving numbers, they're not final, right? We're still progressing. Versus the transfers, we have more time, let's just say, to regain the number. We've only received at this point in the cycle 36% of transfer apps on average, and that's just based on historical numbers. So it's just really give a sense of where we are in the timeline, because anytime I give point in time, I want to give the context to where we are in the cycle.
And Ken, maybe I can answer the question on zero-based budgeting and RCM, the difference in the models. So zero-based budgeting is just an exercise or an initiative where you build for each unit from the ground up what they need to accomplish their mission. So it's not based on history of how many people you've had or how many people you want, but today, what do you need to accomplish your mission? So we're going through each unit to try to build a base budget based on what their needs are to accomplish their mission. The RCM model, Responsibly Centered Management Model, that was a model that was originated out of the University of Pennsylvania and has been adopted by a lot of schools. And it is an approach where each academic unit is essentially responsible for its revenue and for its expenses. So the control is decentralized, typically to the college level, sometimes lower, where the college gets all the revenue that it's generating, and then it pays the expenses to run that college as well. And how we distribute teaching load, the tuition that derives from the teaching load is typically split along some proportional level, parsed out based on the instructor college of record. That is the college where the instructor is. So if you're teaching calculus, it would be Castle, and then the home school, which is the majors, where the majors are. So if you're an engineer and you're taking a calculus course, typically the majority of the tuition would go to Castle and a small portion would go to engineering, and it would be split that way. And that's how the tuition is parsed out. But then all of the tuition and all of the new initiatives redound to the college where they're generated. And then the college has incentives to be efficient in terms of space because they're paying for their various expenses that way. So that's a difference between, one is a zero set. It's just setting the correct budget for each of the units. And then the other is how do you parse out the revenue and expenses to where they're generated or where they're incurred. I hope that answers the question.
And Bryan, are you back on via phone? Bryan, I do see your phone's muted. I don't know if you're on or not. Okay, while we work to get Bryan back on, why don't we move to some additional questions that are enrollment related? So as travel improves, are we going to recruit foreign students even more?
I think, yeah. I mean, I think that, you know, I'd say all students are part of the strategy. I think that we have a strong pipeline at the graduate level right now internationally, and I think we will continue to cultivate that while at the same time, I'd say that the same way we diversify our revenue, we also need to diversify our market. So I think that we will continue to focus on what our strategies are around all populations, but definitely international is a strong part of our graduate pipeline. But I'd also say it's important that we differentiate. And I think a lot of what we're looking at is, you know, we have some strong online programs in our graduate. How well do we sort of leverage even beyond our international market across some of our boundaries? We know that traditionally there are schools that, you know, you still stay within a territory potentially when you're online, but I think a lot of it is finding if there's market demand. So there is a lot of research being done right now to help us as we continue to plan out that longer term picture. But I think international is always going to be a part of it, but definitely just one of many, I'd say, levers that we pull as we look at enrollment.
Thank you. And then Bryan, if you are on, it was a suggestion that you unmute both the phone and the Zoom app. Hopefully that gives you some guidance if you're having trouble getting back on with us. Moving back over to questions. Domenico, I know this was raised during the February 19th town hall. The question again about merit increases. We all saw the news, or most of us saw the news that was in the record this week about Ann Arbor's plans for merit. Did you maybe want to comment on that for our campus?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Ken. We're trying to model a modest merit increase for our faculty and staff this year. And we're going to do the best we can with the realization that there was no merit last year, but it's going to really depend on where we stand in terms of revenue and other decisions we're making inside the budget. But we're going to try to build merit into and we're hoping to have a modest increase this year for sure.
Thank you. Bryan, if you're on, if you could just let us know when you're back on, I will continue to work through questions that others can answer. One question was, were the amounts shown in the PowerPoint presentation, the figures, were they Dearborn specific? The answer to that question is yes. Those were just for our campus. Question, do we anticipate any further employee cuts, early retirements, buyouts, those types of things as we move through this calendar year into the next fiscal year?
We are not looking at any wholesale cuts or retrenchment in that regard moving into next year, but we're trying to be very strategic about where our resources are going and how we're best utilizing them.
Ken, there's a question about raising revenue and is that beyond the appeals to alums? You know, there's the state, there's tuition, there's philanthropy, and then there's external research funding, which, as you all know, we have a new vice provost for research, Armin Zakarian, who's working with his excellent team in the Office of Research. You'll be hearing more from the Office of Research. Armin's going on a listening tour of the departments to think about, you know, how to improve support faculty research operations. That's one of our strategic priorities for the campus. Just an FYI, that's and you know, obviously that works better for some folks in some disciplines than others, but research support will be for all faculty on campus, and every little bit helps. So just to add that into the mix of where we hope to expand.
It looks like Bryan is on the call, the telephone number, but he's muted right now. So
Bryan, if you can hear us, if you can unmute.
Okay. Are you there,
All
Brian?
right, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes,
I can hear you guys. Can you hear me?
Yes.
we can hear you. We sound like a Verizon
Okay.
commercial.
That's probably appropriate.
Okay, welcome back, Brian. We were just covering
Sorry.
questions that were maybe more enrollment related, so perfect timing coming back on. So I'm going to continue with the additional finance questions. So question, does the budget specifically support pedagogical best practices?
Yeah, I think the RCM model doesn't specifically impact pedagogical best practices. I think RCM provides a more transparent budget model that puts the decision making to the decentralized levels and allows the deans to make those decisions. I mean, the budget will support things like Hub and Teaching and Learning Experience Plus, but the model itself wouldn't directly impact those sorts of things.
This question came to us in a few different ways, but the balance in funding to the colleges, in particular CASEL, was underfunded in the previous budget model, particularly relative to other colleges. Do we anticipate this situation being alleviated as we move to an RCM?
Well, RCM is an activity-based model, and so funding will be correlated to student volume, credit hours taught. I'm not familiar with the previous budget models themselves, and so I can't speak specifically to CASEL's situation, but the RCM model is supposed to fluctuate based on the student activity.
Question. We have a couple questions related to things that may be reinstated. So specifically tuition support, M-Healthy. I believe tuition support has been reinstated. I'm seeing nodding heads from the Chancellor. There's also a question here about reinstating matching 401k or 401b contributions. I believe that hasn't changed.
No, that was never suspended.
That's what I thought. And regarding M-Healthy,
It was, Ken, it was suspended in Michigan medicine, but
right.
it was never suspended for the university.
Yep. Okay. And regarding M-Healthy initiatives, they are going on. Hopefully you're participating in Active U and staying healthy, during the winter months. I unfortunately, I did confirm that we won't have t-shirts this year. So continue to work out. You're just not going to necessarily get a t-shirt at the end of the program, but that has been reinstated. Question here about planning for events. This is optimistic, that we can hold gatherings again this fall. How is the budget going to be impacted for in-person events? Should they resume this fall or at some point shortly after that?
Yeah, so those budgets will be in their base budget lines and will stay in their base budget lines. There may be some reductions as you go through the FY22 budget development process, but I don't think there's any plans to take that funding. So they will remain in the base budgets of those areas.
And a somewhat related question, I was wondering this too, should the events start happening again, do we still have a caterer on campus? Is Picasso still part of the UM-Dearborn community?
Yes, they are, and we just extended their contract, I think through 2024 with options to extend through 2026.
Can you confirm how IDC and direct cost will be returned or distributed back to the campus in fiscal year 22, and whether faculty will continue to receive these funds as incentives?
So yes, so that there won't be any policy changes for FY22 with regards to how IDC is distributed to the units. So there will be no change in that regard.
Okay. Um, a lengthy question, but condensing it down, is it true, or is this just a perception that the RCM model maybe rewards colleges that maybe have demands or programs that are in more high demand, based on the current marketplace? And will that be a disadvantage for possibly Castle right now that has, some programs that maybe are not as in high demand from the from industry needs? Does that make sense? Are we going to?
Yeah, I think so. I think take a step backwards. There's no perfect budget model out there, and most universities don't use a pure RCM model, which is all have to be self-sufficient, and then you use the phrase "tub on its own bottom." Most universities create some hybrid model that fits their particular university. And the aspect of RCM that you use to adjust to support programs and activities that are benefit academics and social and the social benefits is the use of subvention, and you use that subvention to balance the particular missions of the universities. So there may be things that don't make a high financial return, but are very important to us, and those things will make sure are properly funded within the model.
Domenico, I see you nodding your head. Anything to add?
No, Bryan said it very well. I think that it is true that programs and colleges that are in high demand typically have very large revenue streams because they're well subscribed. But it is also true that there are many programs on university campuses that are intrinsically valuable to the fabric of a university and may not be able to be self-sustaining. And that's where subvention comes in. And we try to subvent those programs to the best of our ability and maintain overall financial or fiscal stability for the institution.
Okay. A couple questions related to this area. So how does the RCM model work for units that don't generate tuition revenue? And then sort of coupled with that, assuming that the revenue generating centers are going to help fund the service units, if you will, how do the academic units, how are they going to weigh in on decision making and how money is allocated and spent by the service units?
Yeah, so within RCM, I guess you could view it as you have revenue generating units and non-revenue generating units. And the budgets of the non-generating units get allocated to each of the revenue generating units as part of a cost allocation. And that particular process has not been fully developed at the moment. That's a part of the policies and procedures that I will be working on relating to RCM over the next couple months. But we envision there to be a process that will involve folks from the academic side. Perhaps it's the university budget committee that's involved in this process to evaluate the non-academic units, but those are details that have yet to be fully developed right now.
So what is the criteria for a successful RCM? How do we know what we're doing is going to work? And how will we know that it is working? What are the indicators?
Yeah, I mean, I think frankly, the best success is growing our revenue and finding efficiencies in our operations. And I think that's how I would view success for each of the colleges. There's no industry standards for each colleges of what types of operating margins they should be. But that's how I would look at success, is that we're growing the pie.
So Sorry, Brian, while we have you on this hot seat, we'll keep you on the hot seat here. But, and I think you addressed this with the PowerPoint slides, but is there anything you can share, with what we've learned from the ZBB exercise? Any trends, any thoughts, and anything that might be something we're going to change quickly? Or is it just too soon, or will that information be shared just at a later date?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what we're finalizing is getting all the takeaways from the initiative, and then wanting to walk through those with the deans and with the division leaders to have a discussion. Make sure we've captured things in the right framework. But I think there will be a lot of future things to analyze, lessons learned, identified areas that need additional funding, such as deferred maintenance. So yes, a little premature right now, but we will be sharing that information.
Question here, Melissa or Sue, maybe Sue. Hold on, let me find it. There was a question. Okay, sorry, on the last slide, it was stated that there could be improvements to student support systems, specifically to advising. Can you talk a little bit more about what these improvements might be?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. What we're working on right now as part of the rollout of the strategic process we all went through is thinking about the first year experience, and but first year experience, and then through the course of a student's career on campus. And we have one of our provost fellows, Marie Wang's been doing a lot of research, and some folks in the library have been doing some journey mapping of student experiences. And what we're trying to do is pin down where are the pain points in some of the advising pathways for students. Where could more support be helpful? We're thinking about peer mentoring to sort of take some of the pressure off advisors who right now have a lot on their plate. We're also thinking about faculty also have things to give, not kinds of mentoring, maybe not sort of professional advising, and how we can reintegrate faculty into the conversations with students, and in a way that doesn't add yet more onto the faculty workload, which I'm very aware of. So I think right now we're trying to figure out, how do we make it just easier for our students to navigate this place? And I think advising is part of that, but it's certainly not the only part of that. And how do we make it as seamless for them, so that they don't have to spend time looking around for the help that they need, but we make it sort of more immediately available to them. Melissa, did I miss something on that?
No, I mean, I think that the other piece of this, just to remind those on the call who may not be aware, is that a big part of this is also the implementation of sort of how we utilize the technology across campus. And so the advisement part, another piece of this, is that the move the advisement work that's been being done in EAB the last couple of years into Salesforce to provide that integrated student experiences, which is sort of said is that continued sort of seamless experience, that's been kicked off in the last few weeks, and many know who are directly involved with it, but those who aren't be aware that that's also another piece of it. So I think I agree, it's part of the infrastructure, but it's also some of the technology things that are going on is an important also piece of it.
And I would just also add, for folks who are saying you want to hear more about this, we will be reaching out and sharing and getting input as well. It's not like there's a master plan fully in place to mix up anything in these spaces, but we're trying to proceed and carrying out the ideas that were floated earlier on, and sort of get them closer to being action items and not just discussion. So.
Cool. This question came up, I remember, in a town hall, I believe in the summer, and it's a great question, and I forgot the answer, but because the majority of our revenue comes in the fall, and when the state budget is finalized, I believe it's October 1, and then we really don't have our clear full enrollment picture until the start of September. Has there ever been any conversation about moving our our fiscal year.
I
Domenico,
know I have not heard that
Yeah.
here. Obviously, coming from Wayne State did have the October 1st date. But I can tell you it's a pretty big effort to move a fiscal year, and we would have to be aligned with the Ann Arbor campus because we report on a consolidated basis. So I don't think that would be something that we would be likely to do.
Thank you. We have time for maybe one, maybe two more questions. So what steps are being taken to recruit FIDIACs given the constraints imposed by the lack of contact between high school students, guidance counselors, and our university? I hope all that contact has been taking place virtually, but Melissa, if you wanted to address that.
Sure, yeah. I mean, yes, as everyone can imagine, everything is virtual. So there's been a mix of either some high schools have continued to have virtual type fairs, so things that, you know, counselors would have done in person. But I think a lot more, again, we have really enhanced our own sort of virtual presence and how we communicate and or interact. So I think that, you know, I think high school counselors, to be very fair, I mean, every high school has been dealing with their own sort of just this navigating the pandemic. So I think that has impacted a little bit. So I think more of our needs to be relationships with the students directly this year, I feel like, more than necessarily where the counselors would have been more involved. But like I said, I was glad to see that the apps and some of the, at least to this point, the data points we have not lagged, if anything, are stronger. And that's a good sign of the fact that the students are taking the action they need to. And then we continue to just stay on top of that and continue to sort of have outreach directly with our students and families. We have a couple admitted student receptions coming up, the first one being next week, or the 10th. And so we have 3 of those scheduled, which will be in collaboration with the colleges. And that's when we really get in front of our students who we've admitted to ensure that they understand what we can offer them. And so those are a big piece of our yield process coming up in these next few weeks.
Okay. It's 2:01, so we're a minute over. Bryan, there were quite a few questions yet, very specific to the budgeting and the RCM results, and based on your presentation, I believe it's safe to say that a lot more information will be coming in the coming months to be shared with the campus about how the budget is being built and money savings to date and how we're going to be moving forward. I know there's also a budget finance committee that's comprised of faculty, staff, and I believe students, and I believe their first meeting is coming up. But anything quickly to add, is what I said accurate?
I would just like to add one thing before Bryan speaks, because I don't know if he mentioned this, but once we have an RCM model, we're going to run it in shadow mode for a year to see how it would play out if we turn it over. So we'll do fine tuning during that year of shadow mode. Did you mention that, Bryan? I don't remember, or you may have cut out during that period.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know what I mentioned, what I didn't mention, but it was on the slide deck. That is the plan, Ken. I think you framed it that we will provide additional information, especially on the RCM model, in the months to come.
Great. Okay, any final words from any of the panelists?
As always, I want to say how grateful I am to be at this university, surrounded by an outstanding leadership team, outstanding faculty and staff and students, and that everybody's really working very hard, shoulder to shoulder, to do what's right for our students and for the institution. And we're doing it safely and with a lot of dedication and vigor. And I can't thank everyone enough for all of the hard work and dedication that's been input into this process, both the budget, enrollment, everything that we've been doing here.
Cool. I would also like to thank all the panelists. Thank you for our IT support staff and my assistant, Maria Cheatham, who keep this going. And also just a reminder, we will post this recording to the website, and we will do a write-up in Reporter next week on the highlights. And I do want to encourage you, if any of you have specific questions that we did not get to today, please email any of the panelists and look for much more information about our budgeting and the process, all the processes laid out here today in the coming months. So thanks everyone. Have a good rest of the week, and we will talk soon. Bye-bye.